What if I told you that your day off was paid for in blood? This is the story they don't teach in school. The brutal fight that gave you weekends, the violence that ended child labor, and why millions of children still don't have this freedom. Stick around because what you're about to discover will change how you see every Monday off. Let's go back to where it all started. September 5th, 1882, New York City. Something extraordinary was happening. Thousands of exhausted workers were flooding into Union Square, not for a revolution, not for a riot, but for something America had never seen before. A day off, in honor of work itself. Think about that for a second. A holiday celebrating the very thing you're taking a break from. It sounds absurd, but when you understand why they did this, you'll realize this wasn't just a party. It was a declaration of war. The labor union that organized this wasn't just giving workers a rest. They were strategically placing it between July 4th and Thanksgiving, giving workers a reason to gather, to organize, to remember their power. Yes, there were picnics. Yes, there was a parade. But make no mistake, this was a protest disguised as a celebration. These workers had demands, and they were willing to fight for them. Fair wages, the end of child labor, the right to form unions. But to understand why they needed to fight so hard, we need to step inside the nightmare they were living. Welcome to the Industrial Revolution, where progress came at a horrifying price. And if you think it was bad for adults, wait until you hear what happened to the children. 12 hours, 6 days a week, every single week. No vacations, no health care, no pensions, no safety equipment. If you got hurt on the job, you were fired. If you complained, you were replaced. The factories were dirty, dangerous, and deadly. Machines that could tear off limbs, vats of boiling liquid, toxic fumes. This was the reality for millions of American workers. But here's what will really shock you. If you were young, say 10 years old, you weren't learning to read. You were deep in a coal mine, in complete darkness, breathing poison. Children as young as 10, some even younger, worked the most dangerous jobs in America. Coal mines, where cave-ins could bury you alive. Textile factories where one wrong move could cost you your fingers. Glass factories where temperatures reached 100 degrees and your lungs filled with toxic dust. Why children? Because their small hands could reach into machines, because they were cheap, because they didn't complain, and because their parents were so poor they had no choice. This was child labor in America, and it was perfectly legal. So workers started organizing, forming unions, demanding change. But the factory owners? They had other plans. They hired private security forces to break up strikes. They blacklisted union members, making sure they'd never work again. They even convinced the police and military to side with them. What happened next turned Labor Day from a celebration into a battlefield, and it all came to a head on May 4th, 1886, in Chicago. Haymarket Square, a protest that would change labor history forever. Workers gathered peacefully, demanding an 8-hour workday. Then someone, no one knows who, threw a bomb. 7 police officers died. 4 workers died. Dozens were wounded. The authorities needed someone to blame. So they arrested 8 union leaders. There was no evidence they threw the bomb, but that didn't matter. 4 of them were executed. The labor movement had its first martyrs. Now here's where the story gets really interesting. After Haymarket, labor movements around the world chose May 1st as International Workers' Day. A day to remember the fallen, a day to continue the fight. But in America, politicians were getting nervous. Labor strikes were spreading. Violence was escalating. The country was on the edge. In 1894, railroad workers went on strike, and President Grover Cleveland made a decision. He sent 12,000 soldiers to break the strike. The result? More deaths, more violence, more outrage. Cleveland knew he had to do something to calm the situation. So just days after sending in troops, he signed a law making Labor Day a federal holiday. But here's the genius political move. He kept it in September, far away from May 1st. Why? To separate American workers from the more radical international labor movement. to make it about picnics and parades, not protests and politics. Canada followed suit the same year, same holiday, same strategy, and it worked. Labor Day became about hot dogs and sales, not workers' rights. But the workers who fought for this day, they weren't done yet. Because having a holiday was nice, but it didn't change their actual working conditions. They still worked 12-hour days, their children still worked in mines. The holiday was symbolic, but symbols don't feed families. So the fight continued. Through the 1900s, 1910s, 1920s, strike after strike, victory after victory, and yes, more violence. And everything changed again. When millions lost their jobs, people finally understood what workers had been saying all along. In 1938, President Franklin D. Roosevelt sat down to sign a new law, the Fair Labor Standards Act, the law that would finally deliver what workers had demanded for decades. 8-hour workday, maximum, 5-day work week, weekends were now mandatory, and the end of child labor, finally. 56 years after that first Labor Day in Union Square, the demands had become law. Think about that the next time you enjoy your weekend. It took decades of fighting, blood, deaths, sacrifice. Workers didn't ask politely for 2 days off. They fought for it. Parents didn't request that their children get an education. They bled for it. Every 8-hour shift you work, someone fought to limit it to just 8. Every sick day, every vacation day, every safety regulation was won through the labor movement that started with that first Labor Day. So yeah, it's strange to have a day off to celebrate work. But it's not celebrating work itself. It's celebrating the workers who fought to make work humane. And that brings us to the part of this story most people don't want to hear. Remember how I said children as young as 10 worked in American mines and factories? We look back at that and think, how barbaric, how could we let that happen? Well, here's the uncomfortable truth. Right now, as you watch this video, 160 million children around the world are working, not doing chores, not part-time jobs, working in conditions just as dangerous as 1880s America. Cobalt mines in Congo, garment factories in Bangladesh, cocoa farms in West Africa. The same exploitation, the same excuses. Their families need the money. They're providing for their communities. This is just how things work here. These are the exact same arguments factory owners used in 1880s New York. And here's the connection you need to understand. That smartphone you're watching this on, the chocolate you ate today, your clothes, there's a good chance they involved child labor somewhere in the supply chain. We didn't end child labor, we just exported it. American and Canadian children get to enjoy Labor Day and go to school, while millions of children elsewhere still live the nightmare we escaped. So what do we do about it? The same thing those workers did in 1882. We demand change. We support companies with ethical supply chains. We pressure governments. We don't look away. This Labor Day, yes, enjoy your BBQ. Relax with family. You've earned it. Literally, workers fought for your right to that rest. But also remember, the fight isn't over. Workers' rights weren't given. They were taken, through organization, for solidarity, through sacrifice. And every generation has to decide, will we protect what was won? Will we fight for those still suffering? That's the real meaning of Labor Day. Not a day off from work, but a day to remember why work should never cost us our humanity.